The John Kennedy Assassination, Conspiracy and Cover-Up. A 2-hour lecture exposing the evidence that not only was there an elaborate conspiracy in the assassination of President John Kennedy, there was an enormous cover-up to keep the truth from the American people. I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss some very controversial information. For the purpose of dating this lecture, the taping of this video was done on June the 22nd, 1992.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came,
and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
we saw.
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the law.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died. He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight we have episode 033, Ralph Epperson and the JFK Assassination. First, however, a little cleaning of the castle. Facebook at Midnight Rider News Show. That's Midnight Rider News Show. Now, we still have some people going to at Midnight Rider News on Facebook, and to be honest, it really doesn't do anything because we aren't there anymore. It's at Midnight Rider News Show. So please go there. Please like us. Please share. Our Twitter is MWN_STPatrick. We are linked in at STPatrick, and our email is midnightridernews@gmail.com. The free archives, well, they're still at midnightridernews.com, midnightridernews.com, but you can also find them at iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and your favorite podcast providers. Ralph Epperson, who was on episode 015 of our show, has kindly allowed us to use the audio from one of his most requested DVDs. It's called The Kennedy Assassination, Conspiracy, and Covered Up. As Ralph said in the beginning, this was recorded in June of 1992. Please remember that. Now, Ralph Epperson was one of the most popular and important conspiracy authors of the 1980s. And please remember, this was not a time when bookshelves were full of conspiracy books. It hadn't really become an industry like it would after both the release of Oliver Stone's JFK and the enormous popularity of Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM radio show. Ralph's conclusions are not the mainstream of alternative thought. They aren't. But again, listen to this with an open mind and remember that it does represent what many of these authors, researchers, and lecturers were discussing throughout the 1980s. This is a sign of the times and a good one at that. Ralph Epperson is the author of 1982's The Unseen Hand, an introduction into the conspiratorial view of history. And folks, that book is a great read. I promise you that. He's also the author of 1990's The New World Order and a few works on the outlaw Jesse James and the theory that he was not murdered by Robert Ford in 1882. So we'd like to thank Ralph for its use, and we would like to tell everyone that the DVD can be purchased at ralph-epperson.com. That's ralph-epperson.com. Ralph is R-A-L-P-H, and Epperson is E-P-P-E-R-S-O-N. A link to the website can also be found on midnightridernews.com. The website is really an interesting scroll. Take a peek at the 27-hour Secrets of History set, for example. Good stuff. You'll notice a slight buzz on the sound throughout. Now, that's also a sign of the times and not something I was able to take out. That said, here is Ralph Epperson's 1992 presentation on the Kennedy Assassination, Conspiracy, and Cover-Up.
My name is Ralph Epperson, and I have entitled this lecture, The Kennedy Assassination, Conspiracy, and Cover-Up. I believe that there was not only a huge conspiracy involved in the killing of President Kennedy, but that there was a cover-up in the information that was released to the public. I want to ask all of you to presume that you are serving as a member of a jury. And as a jury member, you know that you are obligated to hear all of the evidence before you reach a verdict. Please try to be as impartial as you can as you view this video today, because you will be deciding the guilt or innocence of some very important people. I'd like to start by defining the word conspiracy. It's defined in your dictionary as two or more people meeting in secret for an evil or unlawful purpose. Today we're going to discuss the evidence that there was a conspiracy inside the killing of John Kennedy, and that elements from the Mafia, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Dallas Police Department, and a group no one in this nation is naming except me, killed our president. I will not name this sixth group in this lecture, but it is covered on this video. If you want to know who the sixth group was that killed President Kennedy, you need to view the video, The New World Order. As I said, my name is Ralph Epperson, and I've been looking for conspiracy since 1963. I've written two books, the first of which was entitled The Unseen Hand, an Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. That book was written in 1985, and as you'll notice, it was subtitled An Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. Now, this work provides the reader with the evidence that there is indeed a conspiracy at work in the United States, and that this conspiracy has been operating for over 200 years. But I didn't know the motive. I couldn't understand why did these people cause these wars and depressions and revolutions, etc. So I started looking for that motive in 1986, and I believe I found it, and I published my second book entitled The New World Order. This book came out in 1990, and it explains the motive for this conspiracy. It also explains what President George Bush means by that phrase. And I want to warn you, you won't like what George Bush has in store in this New World Order. As part of that study, I started reading on the Kennedy assassination. For those of you that are too young or perhaps don't remember exactly, President John Kennedy was president between the years 1961 and 1963. And I have found evidence that not only was there a multi-layered conspiracy that assassinated him, but that there was also an elaborate cover-up in the coverage of that murder. Now, it's going to be difficult to cover all of what I've discovered. I'm only going to present here just a smattering of information. But these are some of the materials I've read on the subject. I'm going to show you there are 34 books, and these are just a percentage of those that I've read. Now, I'm not going to read these off to you, but just to show you that there is a wealth of material on this subject written by a variety of witnesses, some who were there, some who were not, some who have written about it, some who have dug into it in more detail. But these are the books that I've read to show you that there was indeed a conspiracy in this killing. These books are available to anyone that wants to read them, and I would suggest to you that if you want to look into this subject, there's more than enough material. That's not a complete list, as I said, but only to show you that there is a wealth of information on this subject. And as I just indicated, I can't cover it all, nor do I wish to. But I will show you that there are some things to prove that the Warren Commission was dramatically and intentionally, and I repeat, intentionally wrong. I am aware that it is difficult to interpret this information correctly, and that's what I've tried to do. I want you to know I've made every effort to carefully interpret the data so that I can reach the right conclusion. As you might remember, in late 1991, Oliver Stone produced a movie called JFK. This was a very controversial movie about the Kennedy assassination because it was one of the first to point out that there was a conspiracy that killed the president. This movie was based on part upon New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's book entitled A Heritage of Stone, and a second book entitled On the Trail of the Assassins. Now, this was not the first movie on the assassination, but perhaps the most recent. But the thing about this was that it challenged the position that this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, shot the president. I'm going to try to show you that this man did not shoot the president and that the movie was indeed correct. Now, to set the stage, we've got to go back to 1963. In 1963, John and Jackie Kennedy are invited to Dallas, Texas. By the way, just as if you'll notice, over the right, Jacqueline Kennedy's left shoulder, you'll see Lyndon Johnson in the background. He was the vice president. John and Jackie got into a motorcade. Here you can see them seated in the car as they're driving through Dallas in a motorcade. And when they got to Dealey Plaza, the car, this is an overhead view of the scene taken from the school book depository. The car came from the left, drove towards the school book depository in front, and then drove off to the right. Now this slide is taken from the very window where they allege that that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John Kennedy. As you know, during that motorcade, John Kennedy was assassinated. This is the Los Angeles Times newspaper coverage of that story. After the assassination, Lyndon Johnson became President of the United States, and here he is being sworn in Air Force One. On his left is Jackie Kennedy. After the assassination, and after a short time, Lyndon Johnson commissioned the Warren Commission to study the assassination and report to the American people as to who did it. That report was issued in 1964, and it reported that Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president. But in addition to that, it also drew two other conclusions: that Oswald shot Dallas police officer J.D. Tippet, and then Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. But the major conclusion of the Warren Commission was that there was no conspiracy and that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy of more than one man. Stone's movie took the position that the reason that John Kennedy was assassinated was because John Kennedy wanted to end the war in Vietnam before it started. Now here's a picture of John Kennedy pointing towards the map of Vietnam, towards the town of Hanoi, which was the capital. Garrison, District Attorney Garrison, was the first to put this in print, as far as I can tell, in his 1988 book. Now, Mr. Garrison confirmed what I have been saying privately and personally since 1985. The movie JFK just says that he was killed because he wanted to end the war in Vietnam. The movie's conclusion is that it was the so-called military-industrial complex, and that conclusion is dramatically wrong. It does not tell us why Vietnam was so important to the conspiracy that killed him. It does not answer the question, what was the real reason we fought the war in Vietnam? Today I will answer that question, and in a second video which will follow this one. This is what James Garrison wrote. In October 1963, by the way, the war started in 1965, so this was a year and a half before it started, Kennedy, meaning John Kennedy, instructed Defense Secretary Robert McNamara to withdraw immediately 1,000 American military advisors from Vietnam, and he planned to withdraw all American forces by the end of 1965. The movie's conclusion of Oliver Stone, as I said, was that this military-industrial complex wanted the war and President Kennedy did not. But Oliver Stone's movie is wrong, and I'd like to point out to you now why I believe that's true. At the beginning of the movie, Stone quotes Dwight Eisenhower, President Dwight Eisenhower, as he was leaving office in 1960. And this is what he shows in the movie, an actual movie of President Dwight Eisenhower warning us about this military-industrial complex. This is what he said. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. But I want you to know that Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, was wrong, because there is no military-industrial complex, and Dwight Eisenhower knew that. That quote implies that the military conspires with the leaders of industry to involve us in war. But that quote by Eisenhower does not answer two questions. What role does the government play in this military-industrial complex? Apparently none. And secondly, how can there be a military conspiracy to involve us in wars without the assistance of the government? Of all the men in the world, former general of the Army, Dwight Eisenhower knows that. Because military officers take orders from the President of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief of all military forces. If you doubt that, Please go back to the 1950s and the Korean War. This is General Douglas MacArthur, who was the supreme commander of that effort, of our involvement in Korea, and he wanted to end the war in Korea by winning it. And he was fired by President Harry Truman because generals take orders from presidents. There is a political industrial complex that uses the military for its ends. Eisenhower was lying, and he knew that. His purpose was to put the American people onto the wrong scent. He was saying, look, the problem is over there and not in government, and I'm saying the problem is in government. Today I'm going to introduce two more conclusions to the knowledge of the conspiracy behind the Kennedy assassination. Number one, it's my conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of President Kennedy, was being trained by the CIA to kill Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba. He was not involved directly in the assassination of John Kennedy. He was not trained, had no knowledge, nothing. He knew nothing at all about the assassination of the president. And number two, there is a major reason that President Kennedy was killed that has not been made public before this date. The Stone movie, JFK, did not go far enough. Kennedy was killed because he wanted to end the war in Vietnam, and I'm going to tell you why that war was so important to the conspiracy that killed him. I will reveal the answer to that question in the second part of the video. And I will be the only one, as far as I know, in the United States saying this. But you will see, I believe, that I am right. Edwin J. Lopez, who was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations that restudied the Kennedy assassination during the years 1977 to 1979, said this: "There's no doubt that Oswald was an intelligence agent. They'll never admit it." And he's absolutely right. And Jim Garrison agreed. Jim Garrison wrote, quote, "I have solid evidence indicating that Jack Ruby," by the way, Jack Ruby later assassinates Lee Harvey Oswald, so he had solid evidence indicating that Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald were paid by the CIA to perform certain functions. Oswald was to establish himself so convincingly as a Marxist that he would win the trust of American left-wing groups and also have freedom to travel as a spy in communist countries, particularly Cuba. But Garrison did not take the next step, as far as I can tell, and that was to answer this question: why did Oswald want to get into Cuba? And I believe that he was being trained, he thought, to assassinate Fidel Castro. Now I want to say that this conspiracy built an elaborate cover around this fact. Lee Harvey Oswald was framed by the conspiracy that killed the president. Let's go back and cover a little information about Lee Harvey Oswald. Now here's a picture of some Marines that were being sent to Japan in 1959. The man in the center is Lee Harvey Oswald. He's looking off to the in front of him, which is on our picture shows off to the left. Now this man started learning Russian while he was in the Marines, and later, after he got out of the military, went to Russia, supposedly because he wanted to defect from the United States. And when he went to Russia, he was sent to Minsk, Russia, where by coincidence there is a Russian KGB training school for training agents in the art of assassination. Now this is a map of the town of Minsk, Russia. Let's start with the green dot. The green dot is where Lee Harvey Oswald lived during the time he spent in Russia. By coincidence, only a few blocks away after was the KGB training center shown here by the red dot. After he was trained, in other words, he was only a few blocks away, and so he didn't have very far to travel. We have been told this is a coincidence that it was only a few blocks away, and I don't think so. After Mr. Oswald was trained, he came back to America and got back into this country without any interference from the State Department. Garrison summarized what we said so far by making this comment. Oswald was trained as an intelligence agent at the CIA installation at Japan's Atsugi Air Force Base, which may explain why no disciplinary action was taken against him when he returned to the U.S. from the Soviet Union, even though he had supposedly defected with top-secret information about our radar networks. Mr. Garrison went on to say this: there are 51 CIA documents classified top secret in the National Archives pertaining to Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby. Now, as you know, currently, right now in 1962 of June of 1992, the government is investigating the decision whether or not to open up records that have been concealed for years. And these are the key. If they open up these 51 CIA documents, we will learn the truth about the Lee Harvey Oswald assassination of alleged assassination of John Kennedy. Garrison even claims to have established the connection between Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's what he said: our investigators have broken a code Oswald used and found Ruby's private unlisted number as of 1963 written in Oswald's notebook. I believe there was indeed a direct connection between Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. I would now like to show you direct evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald could not, and I repeat that, could not have shot President Kennedy. Let's go back to Dealey Plaza. This is an overhead shot. I was there about 2 or 3 years ago when I visited this area and walked around and just to get a sense of it. Let's start here by showing you the route of the president. Up the road, then he turned left in front of the school book depository, down the road where the first shot was administered, down to where the second shot was administered, and then the car went underneath the underpass off to the left. A man by the name of Abraham Zapruder stood up on the post where the letter G is indicated on the picture, and there he took a movie called the Zapruder film. Abraham Zapruder shot the entire assassination scene. Well, let's point out some real problems with what that motion picture shows. I'm going to show you 4 slides, one after the other, in sequence. The Abraham Zapruder film has been audibly looked at or visibly looked at, and all of the slides, the pictures have been numbered in sequence. So when I say this is slide number, or a picture, or frame number 312, etc., that means that's the 312th frame of the Zapruder film. The first slide I want to bring to your attention is frame number 312. Now in this picture we see President John Kennedy always slumped over after he had received the neck wound from the front, or perhaps even from the back. I'm not quite sure myself after many years of research. Also, we look at Jackie Kennedy, who is turning now to assist the president as he's being wounded in frame 312. This is frame 313, and here we see the enormous explosion in the front of the president's head as he received a direct head wound. This is frame number 315, and John Kennedy's body is being slammed into the back of the seat, I believe because, as we're going to point out here in a few minutes, because that shot came from the front of his body. It was from the right front. And then we see here frame 321 where the body is continuing slamming back into the frame. And then lastly, we'll show you this color slide of the final shot, the head wound, where we see in color the enormous blood and brain matter exploding from the front of the president's body. Now I want to go back to show you something that we all missed by looking at those 5 slides. So we're going to go back in sequence now through the 5 slides and look at them again. And this time we're going to see, I believe, who the real assassin of the president was. Here we go back to the first shot where President Kennedy's already fallen over towards the first shot. Let's go back now and look at the driver of the car. And I believe this is a picture of the driver who is turned to his right. And what we see here is him actually looking towards the camera as he's turning to look back at John Kennedy. Now that silver object, or that shiny object right in front of his nose, is, I believe, a pistol, and that this man, the driver of the car, is now going to fire the fatal shot into the head of President Kennedy. Let's go back. I believe that shiny object is a gun. And as we're going to see, that gun is the one that killed President Kennedy, shown right here by the pointer. That gun is firing the fatal shot into the head of President Kennedy from the front. And that's why we see all of this enormous matter coming from the front. Then we see in this slide the driver starts to pull that gun back into his lap, and then we see him speed away and the gun has disappeared. You'll notice that we look at these movies and the videos all the time but never see the driver. We're always looking at President Kennedy, with maybe a small percentage of us looking at the Connollys. We don't look where we're supposed to look. And then, of course, in this last picture, we can see that gun, I believe, underneath his nose, pointing here, in this case, a little bit more clearly, I believe. Now, you'll notice that in this picture, there is no smoke from that gun if the driver did it, and that's a good point. And I'm going to explain to you why that is later when we discuss the gun itself. In fact, I'm going to show you actual photographs of perhaps not the gun that this driver used, but a gun that could have been used to kill the president. Now, it's been reported that nearly 15 people, I believe it was, all within 25 feet of this scene in the Kennedy car, died mysteriously within a year of the assassination. And I believe the reason was they didn't want anyone testifying that the driver of the car killed President John Kennedy. It's also very intriguing and interesting that Kennedy's brain is missing from the National Archives. No one to this very day knows where it is. That's a very intriguing thought, because if the shot came from the front, then the brain would show that, but the brain has disappeared. Now, this is also very intriguing. This is a slide taken from the movie, taken from the other side of the street, and the lady in the pink right on the back of the trunk of the car is Jacqueline Kennedy. After she saw the fatal shot, Jackie Kennedy started crawling over the trunk. Now, we've been told that Jackie Kennedy did this because she was picking up a piece of the brain on the trunk lid of the car. And that's quite possible. No one knows, because Jackie's never told us. But the question which could be answered by Jackie is, did you see the driver kill the car, and did you try to get out of the car in direct opposite position from the driver himself? In other words, were you vacating the car because you saw the driver kill your husband? Jackie has never testified, and I believe I will now show you why Jackie has never testified, if we are right, and that's what she was doing in this very strange behavior. I believe that Jackie did see the driver shoot her husband. Now, let's ask some questions. Let's just say that Jackie did see the driver, and Jackie now wanted to tell the truth. Now, I've done this in high schools. I've never tested it with the general public, but I have asked high schools, when I speak to high schools about the Kennedy assassination, for the young women in the room, and ask them if they wouldn't mind, please, without embarrassment, please tell me how many of you in this room would tell the truth if you saw someone, including the driver, shoot your husband. And it's generally about 50%. I don't actually count them, but I would say it's about 50% of the women. Then I say, how many of you would tell the truth if someone threatened your life if you told the truth? And I get about 25% of the women indicating they would. In other words, they believe in justice, and especially when their husband was involved. Then I ask the third question, which is even more difficult. How many of you women in the room today would tell the truth if the conspiracy that you saw kill your husband threatened to kill your children if you told the truth? And I think this is the reason Jackie is not telling the truth. Her 2 children are still alive. And I believe that those 2 children might be the reason that Jackie is remaining silent. We don't know, because Jackie's never told us. But I don't think there's a woman in this country that would tell the truth if her children were threatened with death. And I believe that's why Jackie is not speaking. One last question that I ask them is, what if you are now 72 or 80, whatever it is, and you're on your deathbed and you decide now to tell the truth, but your children are still alive, and I think even then you wouldn't tell the truth. Now, it's also very intriguing that after the assassination, Congress appropriated money to provide Secret Service protection 24 hours a day, I believe for life, for Jackie and her 2 children. Now, let's just presume that Jackie did see the driver shoot her husband, and she found out that that driver was employed by the Secret Service, and I don't think under those terms Jackie would admit or would acknowledge that the Secret Service, which surrounds her and her children, might not be willing to kill her husband or her children or herself. And I think that's why Jackie has still to this very day not spoken out. She might very well be the key to understanding what happened to this to her husband and the conspiracy that killed him. Now, when Jackie was asked if she wanted to change her blood-stained dress as she was in Air Force One flying back to Washington, D.C. after the assassination, she replied, quote, "We'll go out the regular way, wearing the clothing that showed the blood of her martyred husband." And she went on, "I want them to see what they have done." Jackie, what did you mean, them? And who are these they? It might be time to tell the truth. Now, the Zapruder film has been reproduced, or at least covered, on this Kennedy video. And you can watch it yourself and decide if you want to see for yourself whether or not you believe the driver killed the car. Included in that showing of the same Zapruder film is shown a documentary done by Jack Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, on a documentary that he did on the Kennedy assassination in 1988, 25 years after the shooting. And I want you to know that you will not see the driver. He's been framed out. I believe Jack Anderson intentionally framed out the driver so that you don't see him, because it's possible that Jack Anderson knows that the driver killed President Kennedy. But you'll have to watch that and decide for yourself. Now, this is also very intriguing. This is William Greer, the man who drove the car, a Secret Service agent, and I believe turned around to kill President Kennedy. Now, another question we'd like to ask this man, who, by the way, died, I believe, in 1987, so we can't ask him personally, is why did you slow the car down after you heard the first shot? Everyone around that saw the driver actually saw him turn around, and they acknowledged many of the witnesses saw the car slow down. In fact, the brake lights actually went on. But Mr. Greer was never asked that question by the Warren Commission. His job as driver of the vehicle was to get President Kennedy out of what we call the kill zone as soon as possible. And yet he failed to do that. He actually applied the brakes, slowed the car down, turned around, and then sped out of the area. Very strange behavior for a trained Secret Service agent. Now, it's been reported that Abraham Zapruder called the FBI, and they took the film to a laboratory where 3 duplicate prints of it were made. Zapruder kept his original film in one copy, which he sold to Life magazine 2 days later for $250,000. The FBI kept one copy, and the Secret Service got another. Life printed part of their version, but it was spliced in significant places, and some frames are missing. Now, I want to point out that there is clearly one shot before Kennedy is hit in the throat. I won't say clearly because that's certainly open to dispute, but I'd like to point out to you why I believe that's true. The Warren Commission, when they published the Zapruder film, failed to publish frames 208 to 211. And I believe the reason is because those frames show sharp lines of stress suddenly on the back of the freeway sign. Now, I can't show you this, obviously, without the picture, but in that other picture, I remember the car seems to disappear, in fact, actually does disappear, behind a sign indicating to get in the right lane for the freeway. And then when he comes out, Kennedy's already reaching for his neck. But I believe that the sign showed a stress bullet hole from the back, meaning the grassy knoll side, we'll talk about that more later, and that showed that there was indeed a second shooter. It is known, whether or not this does appear in the frames 208 to 211, that the sign was removed from Dealey Plaza just after the assassination, maybe within a day or two, and has disappeared. And you might wonder why anyone at all cared about that sign. It was taken down. No one knows to this day where it went. Is it possible that this evidence would show a second shooter from the grassy knoll firing and not hitting Kennedy, but hitting the sign itself? You might want to know. Also, there are splices in the Life magazine version of the Zapruder film where these frames are actually cut together by 2 or 3 frames, and you can actually see the glue in the frames. Now, the people at Life answered that question as to where these frames went. In fact, this is what they said. They said that a young, inexperienced laboratory technician ruined the film by accident. Now, there's no way, I would presume, that Life magazine would give a 250,000 piece of film as important as this into the hands of a rookie lab technician. But that's what we're told. I guess we're lucky that we got at least 99% of it, because that could have been messed up just as well. A very strange explanation for some missing evidence. Now, I must warn you that the next few slides are not very pleasant. So please, if this part bothers you, please don't look at this. You might fast forward, but let me show you some evidence of this cover-up and the assassination. Let's go to this picture here first. This is a picture of John Kennedy reacting to what the Warren Commission claimed was the first shot. Now here we see President Kennedy reaching for his neck in the right hand, up in the upper left-hand corner. He's actually reaching for his neck at the time of the first shot. Jackie is leaning over to assist him as he's being shot. And there's the Jackie, and then off to her right is President Kennedy, and those are his arms. Now right in front of the President is Governor John Connally and his wife in that area. Now a little bit further up, back, and no, that's not right, yeah, back there is Governor Connally. Now this picture, by the way, this one slide out of the Zapruder film by itself, this one picture proves that the Warren Commission was dramatically wrong, because this picture shows that the single bullet theory of the Warren Commission is a fraud. And let's start now by looking at John Kennedy. You'll notice that John Kennedy has already reached for his neck, as we've already said. Now let's pan to the right and show you John Connally. And John Connally over here is he's holding on to his Stetson hat. You can't see it very clearly, but those who have analyzed this picture in more detail know that he's holding on to his hat. Now that's very strange, because the Warren Commission claimed that this bullet went through President Kennedy and then struck John Connally. Now I don't know how long it takes for you to raise your arms from your lap up to your neck for whatever time that was, let's say part of a second or a second. That bullet should have struck John Connally. That's the single bullet theory, that the bullet hit both men. Yet here we can see that Kennedy has already responded to the first shot, but Connally has not. What is the bullet doing? It's waiting in midair for 1.8 seconds before it strikes John Connally. Anyone that knows anything at all about bullets being realistic knows that bullets don't wait. Yet this photograph claims by the Warren Commission to show both men getting hit at precisely the same time. That's not possible looking at the actual frame itself. John Connally is not hit even after John Kennedy raised his arms. They were not shot by the same bullet. Connally is still uninjured. His wrist was shattered, we've been told. He's holding on to his hat. He was not injured for some 1.8 seconds later. So the single bullet theory is dramatically wrong. Now please, these pictures are unfortunately very dramatic. This is a picture of the President slumping down to his left. Notice that his face is intact. His nose is there. Please forgive me, this is not very pleasant. His face is intact. There's no damage to his face. John Connally's already turned around to look into his face. But notice that the face is intact. That's very important, because now hold on, this is not very pleasant. This is just a split second later, and Jackie, as you can see, is looking at her husband, because the fatal shot has now hit him, and what is this enormous blob, forgive me, in front of his face? It's to the front and to the right. I believe that is face and scalp of President Kennedy. Now, how can that be? In fact, before we do that, let's go on to the next frame. But here we see another close-up of the same blob in front of his face. And when you watch this in the Zapruder film, it actually flaps, because I believe that this is, forgive me, not very pleasant. It's his face and his scalp being blown away by the force of the second bullet. And that is what you are seeing in these two pictures. Now, this is the recently released photograph of President John Kennedy taken at the autopsy of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Notice that there is no facial damage to the right side of the President's head. Yet if this, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. If this is his face and forehead and his scalp, how come it's in place in this slide here? How can you have it blown away in this picture, and how can it be intact in this? The Warren Commission never asked and they never answered that question. Is this a picture of a double that looked like Kennedy? Is it a picture of a wax statue? I can tell you it's not a picture of John Kennedy. If it was, how come his face is intact in this photograph? The Warren Commission never answered that question. Why does it not show up? And to show you that there was indeed facial damage to the president, this is a drawing made by Paul O'Connor, a lab technician at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Now I know this is not very pleasant, but this is a drawing that he made himself. A man who was there, who actually saw the head, actually held Kennedy's head in his hands, and this is what he drew. Now this is drawn from the back of his head. Notice that gray area is all matter blown away. You can look from the back of his head through the skull, through the brain, and out where his right eyebrow should be, into matter, into space. That whole area, according to Paul O'Connor, had been blown away by the bullet. If it's blown away, how come in that picture of the assassination, it's all there? That doesn't make sense. The observer can see through the skull into the area where the right eye should be. It's gone. There is no right eye. Yet that is where the right eye shows up in the autopsy picture. What's going on? This is a tough question that must be answered by those who support the Warren Commission. If Kennedy's face was blown away, how come it shows up in the autopsy photograph? Now the Warren Commission said that Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president with a rifle from the 6th floor of the building known as the Texas School Book Depository Building. Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman was the first officer to see the weapon on November 22nd, 1963, the day of the shooting. And he signed an affidavit on November the 23rd, the next day, that the weapon that he found was a 7.65 Mauser, meaning the caliber, bolt-action rifle, which was made in Germany. Now, Mr. Weitzman, or Officer Weitzman, had some expertise in rifles because before he became a policeman, he owned a sporting goods store that sold weapons. The Mauser, as I say, was made in Germany. Two other officers were present when the gun was found, and they both described the weapon as a 7.65 Mauser. Mark Lane, one of the critics of the Warren Commission and has written several books on the subject, saw the actual rifle itself when he testified before the Warren Commission, and he clearly states that the rifle was marked Made Italy, Cal, meaning caliber, 6.5. Yet the officers who saw the rifle, 3 of them, testified that the rifle was a Mannlicher Carcano, was a Mauser, rather, made in Germany. That's strange if it was actually stamped on the rifle, Made Italy, caliber 6.5. Now Oswald bought his Mannlicher Carcano from a mail-order catalog. And there are 2 or 3 rifles shown. The one that he bought was the one on the bottom. It's the Mannlicher Carcano. He spent $12.78 plus $7.13 for the scope. In other words, he paid for, and by the way, you could buy this rifle, according to this catalog, for $3 a piece if you bought 25 or more. You could arm an army for $75. That's how poor this rifle was. If he had bought one more, just moved one up on that catalog, he would have bought an M1 Garand rifle used by the military. Now that rifle obviously would cost a little bit more, $89.95, or about 4 to 5 times as much. Now those who know the Mannlicher Carcano know that it was called, quote, a suicide rifle, unquote, during World War II. Very unreliable, very poor quality, made very rapidly for the Italian Army. A suicide rifle allegedly shot the president. It was used by Oswald to shoot the president. Those that know the Mauser know that it is indeed an excellent rifle. Now here's a question that has never been satisfactorily answered. Why did Oswald leave his rifle on the 6th floor of the depository building? He could have given himself some more time if he was fleeing by leaving it on another room or perhaps taking it with him. But he left it where he allegedly shot the president. A very strange act, I think, from a man, even allegedly, as we've been told, by an untrained amateur like Lee Harvey Oswald. He left the evidence behind at the scene. Very strange behavior. Now, Jim Garrison found some evidence that shows that the Mannlicher Carcano was not the only weapon discovered in the depository building after the assassination. Mr. Garrison points out a hitherto unpublished film clip shot shortly after 1 p.m. shows the Dallas police carrying the assassination weapon out of the book depository. This rifle does not have a scope and thus cannot be Oswald's rifle. Now, here's another problem that the Warren Commission did not study. When a rifle fires, when you hold it up to your cheek, it explodes and nitrate ends up on your cheek, and the experts have developed a test to see whether or not your cheek does show nitrate, obviously some evidence that you would have fired a rifle depositing that nitrate on your cheek. So the Warren Commission did indeed test to see whether Oswald had any nitrate on his cheek, and this is what Garrison said about that test. The nitrate test administered to Oswald on the day of the assassination clearly exonerated him of having fired a rifle within the past 24 hours. Now, Oswald did indeed have nitrates on both hands, but none on his cheek. The nitrates could have been left by a substance other than gunpowder. So let's cover this very briefly. This is very intriguing. If Oswald fired the rifle, why is there no nitrate on his cheek, but there is some on his hands, when it is known that cardboard leaves nitrate that would show up on a nitrate test? Obviously, Oswald, working for the school book depository, would have handled cardboard boxes, but he probably would never have touched one to his cheek. So the nitrate test did show that Oswald could not have shot the president. Now, this posed a real problem for the Warren Commission. Oswald had no nitrate on his face, and if he had shot the rifle that day, he would have shown traces of nitrate, and he had none. So the Warren Commission had to cover up that story. Garrison went on. The Warren Commission dug up an expert who testified that in a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, the chamber is so tight that no nitrates are emitted upon firing. And the Commission used this testimony to dismiss the whole subject. But that's not enough. Garrison points out that the inventor of the nitrate test subsequently tested the Mannlicher Carcano rifle and found that it did leave nitrate traces. This expert, the man who invented the test, was not called to testify by the Warren Commission. Now, isn't that an interesting evidence that they failed to ask the very man who should have known whether Bailey Oswald shot the president? Jesse Curry, chief of police at the time of the assassination, retired from Dallas, his job in 1969. Here's what he said. "We don't have any proof that Oswald fired the rifle. No one has been able to put him in that building with a gun in his hand, and yet the Warren Commission said he did, and yet there's no shred of evidence." Let's go back here to Dealey Plaza. Once again, we'll start with where the car drove off to the right, and then came up the street in front of the school book depository, went left, and down the road underneath the underpass. Now, right above there where 6, 7, and 8 are, that area right there is called the grassy knoll. Many people who were standing in front of that grassy knoll claim that a shot or two was fired from that knoll. You'll notice that there's a fence on top of the knoll behind which people claim assassins could have fired the shot. This is one of the witnesses to the assassination. This is Cheryl McKinnon, who reported that she saw the shot, the shooting. She was there. She was an eyewitness. This article appeared, I believe, in her paper where she wrote or covered or lived in something in San Diego. Now, she was there, and she actually reported seeing the smoke in the air near the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza. And this is what she said. "3 shots rang out. I turned towards the grassy knoll where it seemed the sounds had originated. Puffs of white smoke still hung in the air in small patches." She said that in 1983. Now, this is a frame from a 16-millimeter news film by NBC photographer Dave Wagman. And I might be mispronouncing that name. And it may show the mysterious puff of smoke associated with the second gunman in the Kennedy assassination. Now, that circle there, it's possible, could be smoke. No one knows for sure. It's not, you obviously could claim it's the shadows behind the tree or light shining through the tree. but it's also in the area where the smoke should have been. Now, the circle in the center of the photograph is the president's car disappearing underneath the railroad overpass, so you know when this picture was taken, precisely or just a few minutes after the assassination of President Kennedy. One more thought while we're at this point. Senator Ralph Yarborough, a senator following Kennedy's car, he was, I think, the fourth car behind, said when he got to the grassy knoll, he smelled gunpowder in the air. Senator Yarborough said he smelled gunpowder in this area, right in front of the grassy knoll. The Warren Commission claimed that only 3 shots were fired and that all 3 came from Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle from the school book depository. But that statement is full of holes. I want to talk now about the photographic evidence that the 3rd shot, if there were only 3 shots, came from another building. L. Fletcher Prouty, Kennedy's liaison officer to the CIA during Kennedy's administration, wrote this: the Warren Commission report does not account for the near-miss bullet that hit a curb and injured a bystander named James Tague. This is an actual blow-up of a photograph, of course, with Mr. Tague on the left, and this little shadow right there underneath the underpass, pointed to by the black arrow and also the pointer, is a photograph of James Tague. This man was standing at this distance looking at the assassination or at the scene as the car drove by. Mr. Tague, within moments of the assassination, went up forward and reported that he had been struck in the chin, I believe it was, by some concrete that had come from the curb standing underneath his feet, or very near his feet, quite a ways away from the assassination. Now, this is an actual photograph of the chip in the curb. This little cigar-shaped area right there is, I believe, the evidence that this curb was hit by a bullet. In this case, it's being pointed to by a pencil. You can see the perspective. It's at the end of the ballpoint pen or the pencil. Now, Fletcher Prouty went on in his book to point out this problem about that curb. He said, let's draw a line. We'll show you this, by the way, in a slide in just a few minutes to show you what he's talking about. But let's read what he said first. Let's draw a line from the point of impact on that curbstone back to a position within a circle with an 18-inch diameter around the president's head and shoulders. If we project that line back to some firing point, we have placed that gunman in a window of the second floor of the Dow Tex building behind the president's car. The Dow Tex building, I'll show you in a minute, was not the school book depository. If we draw a line from that same point of contact with the curbstone back to the alleged lone gunman's lair on the 6th floor of the school book depository, we discover that the bullet would have traveled about 17 feet above the president's car and quite a distance to its right. Now let's try to show you in a diagram form what Mr. Prouty just told us. Let's start by going down to the bottom, right there being pointed to by the pointer, is the place where Mr. Tague was standing. Now if we follow that road up, the line up, we directly through the car, we end up with that bullet coming from the Dow Tex building. Now understand, if this was a bullet fired at the president, it would have ended up at the Dow Tex building. If it was fired directly and missed the president and kept on its trajectory, it would have hit the curb. If we go back to where James Tague was hit, now back to the school book depository where the shot was allegedly fired, it goes 17 feet too high and off to the right. So where did the bullet come from? It did not, because it could not have come from the school book depository. It came from the Dow Tex building unless Lee Harvey Oswald was a very poor shot and completely missed the car 17 feet to the above and off to the right. Now we've got to examine the evidence that this points out that Oswald was not the lone assassin. Further evidence that there could very well have been a shooter inside the Dow Tex building up in the corner off to the right. So apparently Oswald was not a good marksman if the Warren Commission is correct. This is another problem for the Warren Commission. On Saturday, November the 23rd, the very next day, 1963, the curbstone with the mark of the bullet strike on it was removed and replaced, and that piece of curb has disappeared. No one knows where it is. another piece of evidence that disappeared from the very scene of the assassination. Colonel Prouty went on. The Daltex building would have had a logical field of fire from the rear of the car with no intervening tree. Now, if you go back to the picture we showed quite a while ago from where Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly shot at the president, the 6th floor window of the school book depository, he had to shoot through a tree. If you moved over to the Daltex building down on the 2nd floor, you had a clear shot of the car with no tree at all. That's the point. Let's continue our study of the Kennedy assassination, because after President Kennedy was shot, he and the car he was in were taken to the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, where the emergency doctors tried to save his life. Now, some of those doctors, and others, by the way, have spoken out. The first announcement about the president's death at the emergency room of the Parkland Hospital came from this man, Malcolm Kilduff, the assistant press secretary who was in Dallas at the time of the shooting. He went with the car to the Parkland Hospital, was in the area when they worked on him, and after he died, this man who was hired by our government to be the press secretary, to notify the press of what happened, walked out to the room, which is, by the way, now on film. This is a slide of a TV picture of the Kilduff, Mr. Kilduff, as he came out in the room to notify the press that the president was dead. He made some comment. He said that the president was shot from a bullet wound through the head. And when he says that, he points to his right temple, an entrance wound to the right temple. The very first man out of the room where the president was hit after he was being operated on, walked out and says he was shot to the head, the right temple. Now, recently, a short time ago, another man has surfaced, Dr. Charles Crenshaw. Dr. Crenshaw assisted in the attempt at Parkland Hospital to save President Kennedy after the assassination. And he finally came out after 29 years or so of this material. He finally came out to tell the truth. This is a slide made from a TV show in which he's talking about where the fatal shot came from in his opinion. Don't forget, Dr. Crenshaw said that the fatal shot came from the front. He was there, he was in the room, he helped try to save the president. This is a picture of his interview on the TV program called Now It Can Be Told. And once again, during the interview, he points towards his right temple, showing the entrance wound of the president's fatal shot. Later on another TV show called 2020, he pointed to the same spot. These two men are pointing towards the front where the bullet came from, the right temple. I believe that bullet came from the gun of the driver of the car, and that's the fatal shot to the right temple. Now, the Warren Commission never asked Dr. Crenshaw to testify, and he went on to point out that he was afraid to tell the truth. He's a very courageous man who finally surfaced to tell us what he believes happened to the president. John Kennedy's personal physician, Dr. George Berkeley, believed that the headshot was also believed that the headshot was fired from in front of the president. He said so when he told Malcolm Kilduff just moments before the official death announcement. Let's also cover now, we'll start to talk about the gun that I believe killed the president. Back in 1975, Senator Frank Church, shown in this picture, chaired the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator Church was from Idaho. He chaired a committee that studied the intelligence agencies of the United States government. The committee asked William Colby, the head of the CIA at the time, if they had brought an air gun that fired an exploding shell filled with shellfish toxin. I believe that was the gun that killed President Kennedy. It was a CIA-manufactured gun that fired an exploding shell filled with shellfish toxin. And that's why in that photograph we looked at earlier, there was no smoke. There was no gunpowder to explode. This was a pressurized air gun. By the way, it's very interesting that Mr. Colby admits that this gun that he's now about to show, I'm now going to show you, he brought to the committee, that gun that they had developed had never been used on people. That's very strange. They build a gun to shoot people and then don't use it. Well, I'm glad they didn't use it, but if they didn't use it, why did they make it? Mr. Colby does not answer. But they bring this gun to to the table. Now, that little white spot dot in the middle of the picture is not the gun. It's apparently off my TV set, or maybe in the picture of the slide I took myself off my television set. The man comes from behind the table carrying the gun by the barrel. And as we'll look at the gun, we'll start with the barrel end. That right there is the barrel of the gun, and then round the corner is the handle. And the man who's carrying it now to the table is actually carrying it by the bullet end, where the bullet comes out of the barrel. Now, the reason I took this particular picture was that even though this gun, which is a solid gunmetal black, even though it's very black, it's very shiny. You'll notice here that it's reflecting light as he carries it. Just at this precise moment, the gun reflects the lights from the lights around the table. So I want you to see that, though even though it is a black gun, it's very shiny, because the gun that killed the president, in my opinion, was also a shiny gun. So I believe it could very well have been, perhaps not this particular gun, but could have been another gun just like it. Now, here's another picture. He lays the gun on the table. Off to the left is the handle of the gun, and then as we come forward, that becomes now the barrel. On the top of this gun is a scope. Now, by the way, please forgive me, I took these slides myself off of a TV picture. When the gun is laid down on the table, Senator Barry Goldwater picks it up, who is on the committee, and he points it like most men would want to do. He points it at the ceiling and looks at it, but there you can see the barrel extending past his hands and the scope on top of it. I don't know, but I believe that maybe this was not the identical gun that killed the president, but it might very well have been the gun that killed at least a copy or a duplicate or a brother or a cousin, what you want, of the gun that shot the president. The TV documentary that was covering the CIA, or that was explaining this investigation by the Senate, showed this building here for the very important reason I'm about to explain now. This is Fort Detrick, Maryland, where America's chemical warfare agents are made. This was shown in the video on the Select Committee, Intelligence Committee. And during that video, this man by the name of Dr. Everett Hanel, a microbiologist, comes out and starts talking, and then they flash the words underneath the screen, on the screen, to show who it is. And Dr. Hanel says that we make a shellfish toxin here at Fort Detrick. And he's standing in front of the equipment that they use to handle this very toxic drug known as shellfish toxin, which apparently comes from the shellfish. So in other words, now we have evidence that the CIA has admitted that shellfish can be used, the toxin from shellfish can be used to kill people. It's very toxic, very dangerous to anyone handling it. We now know where it could have been made at Fort Detrick. We now have the CIA admitting they have a gun that could have killed the president, and I believe all of this together points out that the fatal shot was fired by the driver of the car using a CIA-supplied weapon that did not fire explosive shells, meaning from gunfire, but from pressurized air. And I think that is the truth about who killed President John Kennedy. Now, next I'd like to talk briefly about the involvement of the Secret Service in this assassination. This is very intriguing. This is from Colonel Prouty's article. He wrote this: Secret Service men in Fort Worth, don't forget he was shot in Dallas, Fort Worth is a neighboring town, were told they would not be needed in Dallas. In other words, the people who were trained to protect the president in Fort Worth were not being asked to come to Dallas to help protect the president. The commander of an Army unit, specially trained in protection and based in nearby San Antonio, Texas, had been told he and his men would not be needed in Dallas. Now, William Manchester, who wrote a book about the assassination, states that, quote, 9 Secret Service men who were out on the town the night before the assassination, including 4 agents who were to ride in the president's follow-up car in Dallas, and whose alertness was vital to his safety. He further went on to point out that after the shooting started, the White House detail was confused, and their behavior was, quote, unresponsive, unquote. And we're going to see that in a few minutes. First of all, there were no Secret Service agents protecting the president, as we're going to see in a minute. And secondly, that they were unresponsive. They did not respond, and quite likely because many of those men had been out drinking the night before and perhaps had a hangover. Very strange behavior. Let's go on with this now. Colonel Prouty continues, Secret Service guidelines state that when the motorcade must travel at slow speeds, it is essential that there be protection personnel on the ground, in buildings, and on top of presidents. Now we've got to ask the question, was this guideline followed? And it was not followed. And the next question is, why not? Why was this guideline not followed? And thirdly, did the Warren Commission investigate this, that the people in the Secret Service did not protect the president? And we're going to see in a few moments that they did not protect the president. Let's talk next about, and then we'll put that together with the Secret Service, let's talk about where the parade route went and who selected it. This was once again by Colonel Prouty. Forrest Sorrells of the Secret Service said that he, of the Secret Service, and a Mr. Lawson of the Dallas Police Department selected the best route to take him, meaning the president, to the Trade Mart from Love Field. Let's go back now to our overhead slide of Dealey Plaza. Let's go back to the way the car went first. The car went to the right at this point, this intersection or junction, and then went down underneath the underpass off to the right, off to the left. The route that it was supposed to take was to go straight on Main Street and not make the jog up to the school book depository. Let's just point to the school book depository. You'll see how out of the ordinary, out of the way this was, because that's the building where Lee Oswald was in, and that's where the firing came from. If the car went straight on Main Street, it would not have gone up to the school book depository. Who selected the route? Because the first route had the road going straight on Main Street, but later was changed. The route was changed by Earl Cabell, the brother of Charles Cabell, fired by President Kennedy as the CIA's number 2 man after the Bay of Pigs. Now, isn't that interesting? After the Bay of Pigs, where President Kennedy was very disappointed in the plans of the CIA, Kennedy fired many of the top leaders of the CIA, including Charles Cabell. Afterwards, his brother, personally, as mayor of Dallas, changed the route to move President Kennedy directly into the path of the school book depository. A very strange, quote, coincidence, unquote. Let's talk now, continue our discussion about the Secret Service. Because there was no Secret Service protection on the car at during the time of the shooting. The car today, in 1992, is exhibited in the Ford Museum near Detroit, Michigan. And I went there about a year or so ago and took slides of the very car. This is the car that President Kennedy was in when he was shot in Dallas, Texas. Now this is a scene of the back of the car. You'll notice the back bumper on the left, there's a well there and a well on the right, and these two wells allow people to stand, Secret Service agents to stand on the back bumper of the car and protect the presidents. In fact, they've actually gone to the point of including 2 handles that they can hold on to the back of the car and not fall off. 2 Secret Service agents could have protected President Kennedy. If they had been on the back of the car, it's very unlikely that they could have shot the president, because they would have had to shoot either through them or around these 2 men. Yet none of them were there. This is another shot of the same car in Dallas, in Detroit, Michigan, and right in front of the back tire on this side is a little metal device that appears to roll out. And then when it's out in its opposition, a man could stand on it and protect the president from this side, the left side. There's also one on the right side of the car, meaning a total of 4 men could have protected the president, but none did. Now this is a picture of Kennedy, and another, in fact, in the same vehicle. This picture is also at the Detroit Museum. It's on the floor, and I shot down with my camera, took a picture of President Kennedy in the car, the same car that's now being exhibited in Detroit, and there's the president, in this particular case, standing up in the middle of the car. Now notice in this picture as well, there are no people standing around the president, except possibly one. This gentleman right here, I don't know, where is he? This gentleman right here appears to be standing to Kennedy's right. That man right there. He appears to be on the right side of the car standing. Notice the other 3 positions are empty. So at least in this case, possibly one man was trying to protect the president. But when he got to Dallas, there were no men around the car. I want to be fair. There is some discussion that President Kennedy himself did not want the bulletproof top on the car. If that's the case, that Kennedy said, I'll take my chances when I get to Dallas. I don't want the bubble top. I don't want the Secret Service. Then I ask you that if that's the case and it was known in advance, why did the Secret Service not protect the buildings around the route? They did not protect the president. According to guidelines, every tall building must have had their windows closed and people up there to protect the president, but that was not done in Dallas. That's a question that I don't believe the Warren Commission asked nor answered, and yet we've got to. Something was going on in Dallas. Now this is the end of section 1. We'll be taking a short break for a few moments, and then when I return, I'll continue the discussion of the conspiracy and the cover-up behind the Kennedy assassination. Let's continue now with our discussion of who killed the president. The Warren Commission that studied the assassination said that this man did, Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm going to now give you the evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald did not fire any shot that day. Evidence that the Warren Commission was dramatically wrong. And the main reason I know that is because Lee Harvey Oswald was not on the 6th floor of the school book depository building at the time of the shot. We can now see that with our own eyes. But the Warren Commission said that he did. They were lying to the American people because they had the photographic evidence that Oswald could not have shot President Kennedy. Oswald was framed. Let's go back once again to our shot of the Dealey Plaza. We've seen the route. He went right in front of the school book depository. I'm going to point out, that's the route right there. Let's point out the doorway of the school book depository and point out the 6th floor window of the assassination scene. This is where they claim that Lee Harvey Oswald fired the fatal shot from. Now let's go back to the route, and you'll notice where he went after the first 2 shots were fired. And right out there, underneath that, where he is right now, is the letter J. That letter J stands for James Altgens, an Associated Press photographer who took a very critical photograph. Now notice where he is, go back to the point J, and then look back towards the school book depository building. That's the picture he took, back towards the school book depository building. He was on the other side of the street, and he took this enormously famous photograph that's been called the Altgens photograph. Now we'll look first of all at the car itself. This is Kennedy's car coming towards us. We'll first of all look at the rear view mirror, and right behind that is President John Kennedy responding to the first shot. His arm is already up, reaching for his neck. You can see his arm on the left-hand side, or his left arm will appear on the right side of the mirror. Now, secondly, I want to point out to you that we know this is the time of the first shot because on the second car there are 4 Secret Service agents standing, 2 on this side and 2 over there. And notice that they're already turning around as if something had happened behind them. They were responding to the first shot. They heard it. Now, by the way, we've also got to say this. It is not essential that the first shot have come from the rear. They could have heard an echo. This, as you've seen in the various shots of the overhead, we can see that it's an L-shaped area. If someone had fired from the grassy knoll, way in front of them, they might have heard an echo. But in any event, they've turned to the right. The last thing I want to point out to you before we go to another important part is the policeman on the on the left. That policeman right there is also turning around. He's also heard something behind him. So we know this was at the time of the first shot. Now let's go back behind the second. By the way, let's also point that out. Notice that there are 4 Secret Service agents on the car behind, but there are none on the Kennedy car. None where there should be. Let's go back behind the 2 Secret Service agents. We see this kind of lattice work on the right-hand side there. This is all concrete block in front of the school book depository. This black area right there is the front doorway into the school book depository. You do not enter the school book depository by walking directly in. You climb a flight of stairs, which for whatever reason was a very fortunate break because I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was standing on the school book depository in this photograph, and I'll show you that in a minute, right there. Now, in other words, if Lee Harvey Oswald did come out and view the motorcade from the school book depository in front of it, if there had not been a stairway, he would have been in the crowd. We probably never would have seen this. But this black area, to me, reveals a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald standing in the doorway to the school book depository at the time of the first shot. Now this is a close-up of that man. First of all, let's notice a couple things about the photograph. We'll start with this V-neck T-shirt he's wearing. This is not round; it's a kind of a V-neck. The second thing I want to point out to you is that the going down the right side of his shirt, and between the shirt and the T-shirt and a jacket, is this rather bulgy area right there, a strange crease. Remember where it is, about 2/3 of the way down. And then the third thing I want to point out to you is that where it appears to be buttoned about at this point. So the jacket is not completely open, it's not completely buttoned. It's about 3/4 of the way down. What appears to be well above the belt buckle. And the last thing I want to notice, you just generally, in general terms, notice that the coat he's wearing is not black, it's not white, it's kind of a gray. In fact, if you look very carefully, it appears to be kind of a tweedy-looking coat. Well, let's notice that because this photograph was examined by the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission said, my goodness, that guy in the doorway looks like Lee Harvey Oswald. Now notice that the arrow that's drawn in on this, I believe this photograph came from the Warren Commission. The arrow says the word Lovelady. They were questioning who this man is, and they were asking the question, is it Billy Lovelady or Lee Harvey Oswald? The Warren Commission also looked into the possibility of this photograph being Billy Lovelady, who also worked at the school book depository. On February the 29th, 1964, the FBI asked Mr. Lovelady to come in wearing the clothing that he wore the day of the assassination. They were trying to find out whether the man in the doorway was Billy Lovelady. And these three photographs were taken by the FBI in February 1964, about 2 or 3 months later. Well, let's discard, first of all, the T-shirt. If you said, I was wearing a T-shirt, I'll wear another one, it could be any T-shirt. The man might have 25. He's just putting on a T-shirt, obviously not the one he wore that day. This one looks round, but notice the shirt that he's wearing. This is a striped shirt with broad stripes. Now, the Warren Commission said the shirt was red and white. Of course, this is a black and white photograph, so no one knows whether it's red and white. But notice the stripes of the shirt. They're very broad, very easily seen that it's a striped shirt. The Warren Commission knew that Billy Lovelady was wearing a striped shirt the day of the assassination. Now, let's go back to the photograph. Because the Warren Commission said that this man in the doorway was Billy Lovelady. But he's not wearing the right clothing. If this is Billy Lovelady, where is the striped shirt? It's not there. Why? Because it is not Billy Lovelady. It's Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm going to show you the evidence. Now, this is Warren Commission Exhibit number 1797. Shows Lee Harvey Oswald coming out of an elevator in the after being arrested, or he's being questioned by these two men, I believe are sheriffs or policemen or something. And notice here, you can't see it very clearly in this photograph, but if you saw the original, which is in the Warren Commission, the T-shirt that Oswald's wearing is a V-neck T-shirt. You can't see it right there, but it is V-shaped. Now notice the coat. Once again, kind of a tweedy-looking coat. Notice on the way down, it's about 2/3 of the way down, there's a slight crease, not as noticeable, and the coat is buttoned once again about 3/4 of the way down. Now let's look at a series of photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's another picture of him showing the T-shirt quite clearly. In this photograph, it's V-necked. In fact, I've seen other pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald from the back, and once in a while he actually pulled his T-shirt from the back towards the front, and the V-neck thing disappears. Notice in this photograph, once again, the coat appears to be somewhat buttoned, it's close together at the bottom, plus notice it's kind of a tweedy-looking gray. In truth, Lee Harvey Oswald was wearing a rust-colored, kind of a medium reddish-brown coat. It was nothing to do with being black or white. Let's look at another photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's once again, you can see the tweedy-looking coat down about 2/3 of the way down. We find another little evidence of this crease. The coat seems to be somewhat unbuttoned. You can't really see in this picture whether the T-shirt's V-necked or not, but there once again is Lee Harvey Oswald. Here's another picture. This one shows the V-neck line a little bit closer. Once again, this picture was in Life magazine. I took a slide of it, so it's hard to see, but there's the coat, tweedy-looking. There once again is the kind of a crease on the right side. It's not buttoned all the way. It's buttoned about 2/3 of the way down. So now we've got to ask the question, who is the man in the doorway? Is it Billy Lovelady or Lee Harvey Oswald? The Warren Commission said it was Billy Lovelady. Yet all of the photographic evidence indicates it was Lee Harvey Oswald. If Lee Harvey Oswald was on the first floor of the school book depository, he certainly could not have been in the 6th floor of the school book depository, yet that's what the Warren Commission said. In other words, please look at the evidence, and then we can see who really killed the president. It was not Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, after the shooting, Oswald reportedly ran down the back stairs from the 6th floor of the school book depository to the 2nd floor. Victoria Adams, who worked on the 4th floor of the book depository, told the commission that within a minute of the last shot, she ran down the back stairs from the 4th floor to the 1st floor. She said she neither saw nor heard anyone else on the stairs. So how did Mr. Oswald get out of the building? Please do not ask the Warren Commission, because they didn't believe this woman, who was obviously a very essential witness to the evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald was not on the 6th floor of the school book depository. Now here's another problem for the Warren Commission, and they also failed to address this one. Around 9 o'clock, I'm sorry, I missed this slide just to show you that they said the man in the doorway was Billy Lovelady, and they were in error. Around 9 o'clock, on April the 10th, 1963, about 8 months before the assassination of the president, Lee Harvey Oswald tried to shoot or kill Major General Edwin Walker in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald admitted that he fired one shot into the home of the general, missing his head by inches. Notice that the great marksman, Lee Harvey Oswald, could not hit a seated target. But we have been told that just a matter of days or months later, excuse me, Mr. Oswald shot a moving target from an elevated position as the car was going away. Very strange that the man couldn't hit a seated target, yet was able to hit 3 shots, or at least 2 shots, into the president when he was moving. General Walker later testified that Oswald was indeed picked up for the attempted assassination shooting of him sometime between 9 and midnight that night. So they knew who shot at General Walker. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. On April the 10th, 1963, he was arrested, or at least questioned, and then released. No questions asked, no charges filed. Now, why did they release the man who fired at the general? By the way, Marina Oswald, Lee's wife, testified that Lee told her that he fired at the general, yet he was not arrested. Well, let's look at some evidence. This is a photograph found in Oswald's possession after the assassination of the house of General Walker. And there's a car in front of it, and you can't really tell what the trees are and things, but there's a car, Chevy, looks like a Chevy, parked on the right side of the driveway. It was long claimed that the license plate on the car was obliterated by Oswald, and let's look at that next, before police recovered the photograph. Now here's a red arrow pointing towards this gray-black area on the back of the car. There's no license plate. Now I don't know whether it's been X'd out or marked out with a pen or punched out, but this is the original photograph in the Warren Commission of the picture found in Oswald's possession. But the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald had for some reason obliterated the license plate. It's been punched out. So it was done by Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet in the Warren Commission, they have this photograph showing that photograph with the license plate area intact. So when they picked the photograph up, Oswald did not punch out or color over the license plate. Yet the Warren Commission told us he did. Now I don't know why they did that, but for some reason, someone who had this photograph wanted us not to know who was driving the car. No one knows for sure. Well, let's ask the question, why did Oswald fire the shot at the general? It is known that General Walker was a well-known, quote, right-wing, unquote, leader in the Dallas area. And it is presumed that Oswald did this to show the communist world that he was a dedicated Marxist out to kill right-wing leaders. And I believe that fits with the rest of the scenario that I will give you in the next few minutes. I'd next like to show you some photographic evidence that the government actually concealed evidence from the American people. When the car that President Kennedy was seated in got to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, someone put the top up on the car. Now here's the car itself. If you look up between the two policemen there, you'll see the top of the car. It appears as if it's the convertible top, and you would have to presume that it was, because if it was the bubble top, it couldn't have gotten there. And if it is the bubble top, where did it come from? So if it's a convertible top, presumably it's in the back behind the seat, or someone put it up for some reason. But the more important part about this photograph is that this photograph was taken of the Continental that Kennedy was riding in, and we see two policemen and a man in a suit physically removing evidence and putting it in the bucket shown by the orange arrow. That bucket has disappeared. No one knows where it was. No one knows what was in it. The Warren Commission never asked, and we don't know to this very day. Here's another photograph of some cover-up. Here's people walking away from, these look like Secret Service agents walking away from the car, shortly thereafter carrying clothing removed from the car that has also disappeared. No one knows what it is, what evidence it contains, and yet it's been removed. Now, it seems to be very strange that police officers and Secret Service people will remove physical evidence, but here we can see photographs that they did. Now, after the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald left the school book depository building. Let's start our meandering here. He left the school book depository shown by dot number 1 and followed the route down to point number 2, which was his home. And here he stopped and picked up his gun and picked up a new jacket or coat. His landlady said he arrived at about 1 o'clock and left about 1:03. He got in and got out very quickly. From there he went to number 3, down the road, over to the right there, and there he stopped, allegedly shooting Dallas police officer J.D. Tippet at 1:16 p.m. And from there he went to number 4, which was a movie theater at which he was arrested around 1:50. Let's talk about this alleged route because it didn't happen. This is an actual photograph, the one we just looked at, this one we're looking at now, of the Warren Commission reconstruction of his activities after the assassination. However, there are some real problems in this reconstruction. I won't have time to point out all of them, but I will cover just a few. Let's talk first of all about the Tippet murder. This is a slide of Dallas Police Officer J.D. Tippet. Now, before we feel sorry for this man who was shot after the assassination, allegedly by Lee Harvey Oswald, and murdered, he was dead, he was killed at the scene. Before we feel sorry for him, there is some evidence. Many witnesses came forward to testify that they saw Tippet, this policeman, along with Jack Ruby, along with Lee Harvey Oswald. So before we feel sorry for him, we've got to examine that, which we're not going to do today because I don't have time, but let's talk about, there are at least 4 problems about the shooting of this officer if Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Number 1, Oswald could not have gotten there in time to shoot the officer. I'll cover that in a little more detail. Number 2, even if he did get there in time to shoot the officer, eyewitnesses described another man. Even if he did have time to get there and he was the man who shot him, number 3, there are eyewitnesses who said that the gun that he used couldn't have shot, the gun that he had couldn't have shot the policeman. And then number 4, even if he could have gotten there in time, and even if the eyewitnesses said he did it, and even if his gun was right, the bullets found in Officer Tippet do not match the cartridges found at the scene. Other than that, there's no problem, and the Warren Commission could conclude that Lee Harvey Oswald did indeed shoot the president. But those 4 problems point out that Oswald could not have shot the president, yet they shot the policeman, but the Warren Commission said he did. They looked at this evidence and said that Oswald did it. Now I'm going to give you 3 witnesses, one after the other, with a couple of comments interspersed between, but let's take a look at this and let's see whether or not the eyewitnesses said Lee Oswald did it. The first eyewitness was a woman by the name of Akhil Cummins, and she worked at a home just down the street from where Tippet was shot. She was an eyewitness who described the murderer as, quote, kind of chunky. I'm sorry, I got the wrong slide up there, forgive me. This one here. Kind of chunky, kind of heavy, kind of short. Yes, there was another man on the other side of the street. So here we've got a problem. Then we've got a chunky man shooting the man being kind of heavy, kind of short, and let's talk about that next. was that Lee Oswald. But let me, first of all, talk about the other witnesses. Let's go to witness number 2. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the timing first, and then we'll get back to the other 2 witnesses. Oswald was staying with Earlene Roberts at 1026 North Beckley, not very far away from the shooting of Officer Tippet. Now, she reported that Mr. Oswald left the house at about 1:04 in the afternoon, after coming in around 1 o'clock and then leaving with his pistol and with another coat. Tippet was shot no later than 1:16. That gives him 12 minutes to get from his house to the scene. David Bellin, the Warren Commission counsel, walked the distance in 16 minutes. So 1:04 plus 16 is 1:20. However, he wasn't shot at 1:16. He was shot around 1:06 or 1:07. A witness by the name of Helen Markham reported the shooting at 1:06 or 1:07. She was on her way to catch her bus at 1:12, 1 block further south. And she was actually detained after she saw the shooting. She was fearful that if she stayed to report what she saw, she would miss her 1:12 bus. But they said he was shot at 1:16. She was talked into staying so that she could give her eyewitness account to the policeman. And here's what she told the police about the gunman. So eyewitness number 2, the gunman was short, a little on the heavy side, with somewhat bushy hair. Now, let's put this all together when we get to the end. We'll see whether or not that matches Lee Oswald. T.F. Bowley, the only witness at the Tippet scene who looked at his watch to check the time when he saw Tippet's body, said in an affidavit taken by the Dallas Police Department that Tippet was already dead at 1:10 p.m., while the commission said he was shot at 1:16. If Bowley was correct about the time, Oswald could not have walked from his rooming house to East 10th Street in time to kill Tippet. Domingo Benavides, the third witness, said this. He was only 15 feet away from the murder scene. He testified that the man who shot Tippet was short and stocky. Notice that all the witnesses said that the murderer was short, heavy, or stocky, and had bushy hair. Oswald was 5'11" tall, weighed 170 pounds, and had thinning hair. Yet the Warren Commission said that Oswald shot the police officer. Why? This is a possible clue. This is very interesting. Here we see with the red dot, the first red dot, Oswald's rooming house put down on the map going towards, in Dallas, of the area where Oswald lived, where Jack Ruby lived, and where Officer Tippet was shot. If you follow the red line, follow the line from the red dot where Oswald lived, you come to the Tippet shooting, and then when you get the Tippet shooting, you go in a straight line, almost a straight line, to Jack Ruby's house, the red dot down there at the bottom. Now, that's very intriguing. Why would Oswald appear to be going towards Jack Ruby's house with a gun in his hand? My theory is, and that's all that this is that Lee Oswald sensed he was being framed, stopped at his house to pick up a pistol, and went to kill the man he believed he was being framed by, Jack Ruby. Now, I know that's speculation. There's no way to prove it, but there is evidence that Ruby and Oswald were seen together. Many witnesses have come forward to testify that, but at least the straight line would seem to indicate that if Oswald was indeed in the area, he was going towards Jack Ruby's house with a pistol in his hand. Now, he went off to the right, or to the left of the screen, but he went up to a movie house and was later captured, and that's where he was arrested. Now, the next problem was that the police found 4 cartridges at the scene of the shooting. This is an actual slide of the pistol that Lee Oswald was carrying that day when he was arrested. Notice it's a pistol, and pistols do not eject the cartridge after the bullet is fired. It stays in that cylinder. Here's what we have to deal now with this problem. James Garrison said, quote, "We suspect that cartridges had been previously obtained from Oswald's revolver and left at the murder scene. Of the 4 cartridges found at the scene, 2 were Winchesters and 2 were Remingtons. But of the 4 bullets found in Officer Tippet's, 3 were Winchesters and 1 was a Remington." So they had to solve this problem. The Warren Commission called as its witness ballistics expert Cortland Cunningham, and he testified that it was impossible to determine whether or not these bullets had been fired from Oswald's gun. So here we've got the conclusion. From a fair and a brief review of the evidence, Oswald could not have shot the police officer because he did not. The Warren Commission knew that. They lied to the American people, and they framed an innocent man. Now, during the time that Oswald was being arrested, the drama continued to unfold in Dallas. Vice President Johnson, after being told that President Kennedy was dead officially, took the oath of office, and as we've seen in that slide, he became President of the United States. I'd now like to present the evidence that Johnson knew that President Kennedy was going to be assassinated. At 2:47 p.m. that afternoon, Air Force One, now with Lyndon Johnson in it as president after being sworn in, left Love Field in Dallas for Washington, D.C. Just before midnight on Friday, November the 22nd, about 10 hours later, Lee Oswald was formally charged with the murder of President Kennedy. So we've got about maybe 9 hours between the time that the plane left and the time that Oswald was charged with the murder. This is a book entitled The Making of the President, written by Theodore H. White in about 1964. And he wrote this about the return flight from Dallas back to Washington. Quote, "The party, meaning President Johnson, and the others, learned that there was no conspiracy, and they learned that learned the identity of Oswald and of his arrest." Now the question is, how did they learn that between 2:47 p.m. in Dallas time and about 5 or 6 o'clock in Washington, D.C. time if Oswald was not arrested for at least another 4 to 5 hours? How can it be that Johnson learned who the assassin was on the afternoon of the assassin? Please don't answer, because if you do, you get evidences of a cover-up and a framing of Lee Oswald. Oswald had just been captured. He had not been charged. He constantly denied that he killed the president. He had not been given the paraffin test, yet the Johnson party learned that he was the murderer. If Mr. White's timing is right, someone had to know that Oswald was the person being framed before the assassination. That someone had to notify President Johnson before even the police knew. That means there was a conspiracy that framed Lee Oswald. That is the only explanation that fits the evidence. Let's continue while we're talking about President Johnson to point out that Johnson himself did not believe that Oswald acted alone. President Johnson gave an interview in Atlantic Monthly in July 1973, 10 years after the assassination. He's quoted as saying, quote, "I never believed that Oswald acted alone, although I can accept that he pulled the trigger." Now here we've got a mixed bag, because he's saying that he believed that he pulled the trigger, but that he did not act alone. So he's about 50% right. There is some evidence that he knew that President Kennedy was going to be murdered on November the 22nd, 1963. Now this is a slide of Madeline Brown. Madeline Brown claims now, recently, to be the witness to President Johnson. On the bottom of this photograph, she's holding in her right hand a picture of Lyndon Johnson and a picture of the son that she claims is the illegitimate son of Lyndon Johnson. Now, people who know the young boy, who's now, I guess, in his 30s or something, they claim that this man does indeed look like Lyndon Johnson, and this woman is now telling the truth that she is indeed, was indeed, the mistress of Lyndon Johnson, and that son there is the son of Lyndon Johnson. Now, this is a letter that she's been carrying around. In fact, I've seen this letter on television here recently. Geraldo, I believe it was, on his TV show, held the letter up and certified that it was indeed what she claimed it was, at least a letter claiming that in the wording, Lyndon Johnson, the letter was written by the attorney to Lyndon Johnson, that Lyndon made arrangements for Madeline's son, for the taking care of that son in 1973 after Lyndon's death. So she's telling the world that she was the mistress, and she's proving it by the use of this letter, that Lyndon Johnson, after he died, made arrangements in his will that the son be taken care of after his death. Now, Mrs. Brown told the world in January of 1990 about a conversation she had with Lyndon on the morning of November 22nd, 1963, the morning of that assassination. She said that Lyndon said, quote, "Those GD," and I've deleted those words, you can figure it out yourself if you choose to do so, those G.D. Kennedys won't embarrass me again after today. That's not a threat, that's a promise. It appears as if Lyndon Johnson was made aware of the plans of the conspiracy that killed President Kennedy before the shooting. And I believe he was, and I'll try to tell you why in the second video part of this lecture, the war in Vietnam, because I believe they had to know what Johnson was going to do in executing the plans for the Vietnam War. And that's why they had to know, why he was made to know about the assassination before it happened. Let's present some further evidence that Oswald did not shoot the president. I'd like to use a device that's been invented since the assassination called the Psychological Stress Evaluator, or abbreviated to the PSE. The PSE was developed in the 1970s and can work from a tape recording. You don't have to be there in person to determine whether or not the person who made the tape was lying. The inventor discovered that the frequencies composing the human voice are not fixed, and that they shift very slightly from 8 to 14 times every second. But when the speaker is under stress, the normal frequency modulation disappears. What remains are the pure component frequencies of the voice, and a strong indication that the speaker is lying. Scientific lie detection is based on the fact that the act of lying produces certain momentary changes in the body. The discovery that the stress accompanying deception causes subtle, inaudible changes in the speaker's voice at the very moment he's telling a lie, and the PSE measures that stress. Now, this is a book entitled The Assassination Tapes, written after the assassination, that actually tested the voice of Lee Oswald on the PSE. And they proved, if this test is correct, that Lee Oswald was not lying when he denied that he killed Tippet or the president. At a midnight press conference, a reporter asked him, quote, "Did you kill the president?" And Lee Oswald, and you've probably seen this on television, responds, "No, I have not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet." Those are the exact words of Lee Oswald. At another press conference, Oswald was asked, "Did you shoot the president?" And Oswald answered, "I didn't shoot anybody, no, sir." So his categorical denial that he shot anyone contains almost no stress at all. So the conclusion of this book is that Oswald denied shooting anybody, the president, the policeman, and anybody. And so the PSE, here shown in the book, said or shows that Oswald was telling the truth. Quite clearly, Oswald was speaking the truth when he said he didn't shoot anybody that day. But some still believe that all of this evidence is wrong, that Lee Oswald killed the president. This is Gerald Ford, later became president, but Gerald Ford served on the Warren Commission in 1963 and 64, and even as early or as late as you will, as December of 1991, December the 19th, Mr. Ford said this, quote, "The truth is known. Lee Oswald was the lone gunman who killed President Kennedy and Dallas police officer J.D. Tippet." Even with all of this evidence that it is impossible for Oswald to have shot him under all those circumstances, even 28 years later, the president, Gerald Ford, on the Warren Commission, is claiming that Oswald did not shoot the president. Here's what another member of the Warren Commission said, John J. McCloy. He said, quote, "I never saw a case more completely proven," unquote. Now, maybe the reason that President Ford and Mr. McCloy have said these things is because they know what happened to others on the Warren Commission who had problems with the conclusion that Oswald killed President Kennedy. This is Senator Richard Russell of Georgia, also on the Warren Commission, and he said this in January 1970, maybe 7 years later. "I never believed that he," meaning Oswald, "did it," meaning the assassination, "without any consultation or any encouragement whatsoever. Too many things caused me to doubt that he planned it all by himself." Remember that the senator said this in 1970 and that he died in 1971. This is a slide of Congressman Hale Boggs from Louisiana, also on the Warren Commission, and he had begun to express reservations about the Commission's conclusions before his death in a light plane crash in Alaska in 1972. But why do millions of Americans believe that the Warren Commission is correct? Why are those who point out the errors called radicals or reactionaries? Mark Lane found a CIA memo. He's one of the doubters, skeptics. Found a CIA memo called document 1035-960. Here's what it says. We do not recommend, the CIA told its agents, we do not recommend that discussion of the assassination question be initiated where it is not already taking place. In other words, agents don't get involved. Where discussion is active, however, addresses are requested. In other words, you have our permission to discuss, if you challenge the evidence that Oswald did indeed do it. The charges of the critics, people like me, are without serious foundation. This is what the CIA told its agents. Point out that parts of the conspiracy talk appear to be deliberately generated by communist propaganda, unquote. So ever since the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s, we have heard about this talk about communist boogeymen who are just paranoid. Those who believe there are communist boogeymen everywhere. That only the radical right believed that the communists were a real threat. Now we have the radical left in the CIA charging their agents to accuse serious researchers as being, quote, part of communist propaganda, unquote. Once again, very, very hypocritical. The existence of the CIA memo was confirmed by the Newsweek magazine of December 23, 1991. This is what it says on page 53. If conspiracy theorists seem paranoid about the CIA, the agency is partly to blame. In the late 1960s, the CIA sent its agents a memo explaining how to counter skepticism about the Warren Commission. Jim Garrison agrees. There is, without a doubt, a conspiracy by elements of the federal government to keep the facts of this case from ever becoming known. Now, you don't even have to know what to believe in the former books. In fact, you don't even know what to believe. The U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Intelligence issued a report which revealed that more than 1,000 books have been, quote, produced, subsidized, or sponsored, unquote, by the CIA. So your taxpayers' money is being used to lie to you. I hope that you noticed that I've been trying very hard here to confirm all of my research with pictures, actual quotes from the witnesses, or whatever it takes to get the material out to you. So in other words, we don't know what to believe, but it's very difficult, and once you start to figure it out, it does all make sense. I want to present further evidence of this cover-up. This is an ad that appeared in the first 1.5 million copies of the May 1983, 20 years later, issue of Reader's Digest. The advertisement promoted a 3-part series on the Kennedy assassination taken from a book entitled Reasonable Doubt. The ad reads, quote, 20 years after the shots were fired in Dallas, most Americans do not believe that Lee Oswald, acting alone, killed the president. This book explains why the skepticism grows and offers fresh insights and new information that lead to an unavoidable conclusion: a conspiracy killed JFK. Editor-in-Chief Ed Thompson was given the opportunity to resign after this advertisement was pulled off of the later subsequent issues of Reader's Digest. And his replacement, Ken Gilmore, put the JFK excerpts and book on hold as his very first official act. Within weeks, he canceled the entire 2.5-year project. Gilmore is a close personal friend of Gerald Ford, a member of the Warren Commission. Gilmore was Ford's ghostwriter for the post-Watergate book entitled A Time to Heal, which was co-published by Reader's Digest. Not only did the government lie to the American people, they also urged witnesses to lie. One case in point is a quote from a book written by Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, and his book was entitled Man of the House. And in that book, Tip O'Neill, former congressman, now retired, talks about having dinner with Kenneth O'Donnell, a special assistant to John Kennedy. And this is what Mr. O'Neill says. I was surprised to hear O'Donnell say that O'Donnell was in a car, a couple of cars after John Kennedy's car went through the scene. He was also in the motorcade. I was surprised to hear O'Donnell say that he heard 2 shots that came from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. That's not what you told the Warren Commission, he said to O'Donnell. He, meaning O'Donnell, replied, quote, "You're right. I told the FBI what I had heard, but they said it couldn't have happened that way and that I must have been imagining things. So I testified the way the FBI, wanted me to," unquote. Now here's how O'Donnell testified when he spoke to the Warren Commission. He was asked where he thought the shots came from. "My reaction is that they came from the right rear," meaning the schoolbook depository. So the FBI says, "Change your story," and O'Donnell changed his story. Burt Griffin, an assistant counsel to the Warren Commission, admitted that the government lied. He said this, "It was clear that the CIA and the FBI lied to us at times, basically for the same reason, to protect themselves." So here we've got the government lying, covering up, distorting the truth, challenging people who tried to find the truth, calling them communists, everything else, and yet we continue to believe the Warren Commission report. Even David Bellin, the former Warren Commission staff member who is defending the Commission's report conclusions, today says this: the CIA deliberately withheld evidence of the CIA mafia plots against Fidel Castro. The CIA is lying, has lied, and apparently will continue to lie unless we tell the truth. This is a copy of a letter dated December 14th, 1965, that J. Edgar Hoover wrote to a constituent who asked him. I blocked out the name. It says, quote, this letter says, and I'll read you part of it, "You are correct," meaning the person who's writing is correct, "in the observation that frames 314 and 315 of Commission Exhibit 885 are transposed in Volume 18. This is a printing error and does not exist in the actual Commission exhibit." So what he's saying is that this person who wrote the letter was correct, that these 2 frames have been reversed in the official Warren Commission report. So when you go to the Warren Commission, look at these 2 photographs, they've been reversed. So it's instead of 314, 315, it's 315, 314. The reason that the Commission, I believe, intentionally reversed the photos is because the conspirators wanted us to believe that President Kennedy's head went forward instead of backward. So they reversed the 2 photographs showing the body went forward rather than back. If his head went forward, the shot came from the rear. But if it went backward, the shot came from the front. And the official lie is that the fatal shot came from the rear. Now, after all of this evidence, I would think it is fair to conclude that the Warren Commission simply covered up the conspiracy that assassinated President Kennedy. I think all that we've examined in the last nearly 2 hours is that the Warren Commission intentionally lied to you. There was not only a conspiracy, but a massive conspiracy, and after that conspiracy killed the president, there was a massive cover-up. This thing is big, and in the second video to this one called Vietnam, America's Betrayal and Treason, we will examine why the president was killed and why this act of assassination was indeed covered up. Let me end by reminding you of a conversation that Lewis Carroll wrote about in his book, Through the Looking Glass, commonly referred to as Alice in Wonderland. In that book, the writer has Alice having a discussion with the Queen of Hearts. And Alice says, quote, "I can't believe that." And the Queen says, "Oh, can't you? Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes." Alice laughed and said, "There's no use trying. I can't believe that. One cannot believe impossible things." And the Queen responds, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." The Queen is right. It's very easy. Draw a deep breath and shut your eyes. And you too can believe an impossible thing called the Warren Commission report. Thank you so very, very much, and may God bless America.
That was Ralph Epperson from 1992, the audio of his DVD, The Kennedy Assassination, Conspiracy and Cover-Up. I want to thank Ralph Epperson again. He was so kind as to let us use the audio. And again, you can get the DVD at ralph-epperson.com. Ralph's also very active on Facebook, by the way, so you can follow him there. For those who are still with us, and I hope that you are, I'd like to take this moment to announce that we'll be doing more of this in 2018. I think it's important to preserve the history of those who stood up long before we did. Therefore, we're going to have standalone episodes like this one, where we give to you the presentations, speeches, interviews, and shows from the legends of conspiracy and alternative thought. Now, these will be additions to our regular lineup of shows and not replacements. There'll be extras for you, our listeners, so that you too can download them and add them to your collections. If you've listened to all of our episodes, you know how I'm a strong believer in paying homage to those who came before us and paved this path. That's what we shall do in 2018. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.
The Midnight Rider News Show with St. Patrick is a production of MidnightRiderNews.com. Copyright belongs to St. Patrick and all rights reserved. You can email us at midnightridernews@gmail.com and be sure to visit MidnightRiderNews.com for the best in alternative historical analysis. This is Leanne saying thank you for listening, have a great night, and always remember, when life throws you lemons, throw them back and demand chocolate.